It started as a normal hiking trip. I had taken a few days off work, packed my backpack, and drove out to a remote area near the Wyoming-Idaho border. I had planned to hike deep into the Caribou-Targhee National Forest. I wanted peace and quiet, some solitude, and a bit of a challenge. I didn't know that I would come back a different person. I had been hiking regularly for years, so I knew how to prepare. My gear was solid: weatherproof backpack, tent, sleeping bag, first aid kit, GPS, maps, knife, food for 5 days, and plenty of water. I had planned a 3-day hike that would take me up past a few ridges, down into a valley, and back around in a loop. No one knew the exact trail because I was following a mix of marked and unmarked routes, but I had checked in with the ranger station and left a copy of my route just in case. The first day was peaceful. The air was cool, the trail was damp but not muddy, and the sky stayed mostly clear. I passed through dense pine forests, walked along a rocky riverbed, and climbed to a high ridge where I could see the land stretch for miles. I didn't see anyone else the entire day. When I made camp just before dusk, I felt good. My legs were sore, but it was the kind of soreness that made me feel alive. I set up the tent just off the trail in a small clearing, ate some freeze-dried food, and fell asleep to the sound of the wind through the trees. The second day things started to feel different. I woke up early and packed quickly, eager to get a head start. The forest was quiet, more quiet than it should have been. No birds, no bugs, not even the rustle of animals in the underbrush, just the sound of my own footsteps. I tried to ignore it at first. Maybe the animals had sensed a storm coming or something. I hiked for hours, climbing down into a deep valley that was shaded by towering trees. The further I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. I stopped several times to look around, listening for anything out of the ordinary, but there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just that heavy silence. By midday, I came across what looked like a set of boot prints going off the trail into the woods. That struck me as odd. They looked fresh, maybe a day or two old, but they weren't heading toward anything. No camp, no shelter, just off into the trees. I followed them for a short while out of curiosity, maybe 100 feet or so, but they just stopped near a patch of rocks. No sign of anyone or anything. I turned around and kept going. Later that afternoon, I took a short break near a stream to refill my water and eat a quick snack. I pulled out my map to check my position. That's when I noticed something weird. The landmarks I was seeing around me didn't quite match up with the map. The stream was supposed to bend east, but it looked like it was running straight south. There were supposed to be 2 ridges on either side of the valley, but I could only see one. I thought maybe I had taken a wrong turn earlier, but I checked my GPS and compass. Everything seemed fine. I had been planning a solo hiking trip for months. I wanted to challenge myself and disconnect from everything for a few days. The plan was simple: hike into the Bitterroot Mountains in western Montana, spend 3 nights alone, and come back refreshed. I had gone on plenty of hikes before, but this would be my longest solo one. I picked a loop trail that stretched nearly 35 miles, mostly uphill through forest, rocky ridges, and across a few small streams. I didn't expect to see many people, and honestly, that was the point. I started early in the morning, just after sunrise. The air was still cold from the night, but the sky was clear. I parked my car at the trailhead and double-checked everything in my backpack: tent, food, water filter, extra clothes, map, compass, small first aid kit, and my knife. I also had a small emergency beacon that could send my location if I got hurt or lost. Everything was good to go. The first few miles were peaceful. I heard nothing but the sound of birds and the wind moving through the trees. The trail slowly climbed uphill, winding through thick pine forest. I took breaks every hour or so, drank water, and kept a good pace. I didn't rush. My goal was just to make it to the first campsite marked on the map by late afternoon. Around midday, I reached a small clearing that looked down into a steep valley. I sat down to eat a snack, feeling pretty good about the progress I had made. I hadn't seen anyone since the trailhead, and there were no signs of animals nearby. No prints, no scat, no rustling. It was just still and quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I hiked for a few more hours before I got to the first designated campsite. It was nothing fancy, just a flat patch of dirt near a slow-moving stream. There was a fire ring made of rocks and enough space for 1 or 2 tents. I set up camp, filtered some water, and made a simple dinner. Afterward, I sat by the stream and watched the sun go down. The sky turned orange, then purple, and finally dark blue. That first night, I fell asleep fast. I was tired but happy. It felt good to be alone in the wild. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why. I wasn't cold, and I didn't hear anything at first. I just felt weird, like something had changed. I lay still, listening. The forest was silent, not even a breeze. My tent was zipped shut. I didn't hear footsteps or branches breaking. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I stayed still for what felt like an hour before I finally fell back asleep. The next morning, I packed up and kept going. I had about 12 miles to cover that day, mostly uphill. The trail got narrower as I climbed, and there were sections where I had to watch my footing carefully. I crossed a few snow patches that hadn't melted yet, even in July. Around noon, I passed through a high rocky area with low shrubs and no trees. I had a clear view of the next ridge, and I stopped to rest again. That's when I saw something strange. Across the ridge, maybe half a mile away, there was a figure. First, I thought it was a hiker, but they weren't walking. They were standing still, just staring in my direction. I waved, but the figure didn't move. I watched for a few more seconds, then looked down to take a sip of water. When I looked back up, the figure was gone. I told myself it was just someone taking a break behind a rock, or maybe I imagined it, but I picked up my pace. By late afternoon, I reached the next camp area. This one was near a small alpine lake. I set up my tent quickly, ate a cold meal, and didn't waste time sitting around. I kept checking the tree line. Again, I saw no animals, no birds, no people, just stillness. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound made me open my eyes. I thought I heard something like footsteps outside my tent once, but when I sat up and listened, everything went silent again. I stayed awake most of the night, clutching my knife and waiting for morning. The next day, I was tired and irritable. I had another 10 miles to go to complete the loop, and I wanted to finish early. I packed fast and didn't eat much. My legs were sore, but I kept pushing forward. The trail dipped down into another valley with thick trees and a fast stream. The woods felt tighter here, darker. I kept looking over my shoulder. Sometime in the afternoon, I noticed something on the side of the trail, boot prints, but they weren't mine. I had been walking through mostly undisturbed ground, and these prints were fresh. They went in the same direction as me. I slowed down. The prints weren't consistent, like the person had been walking, then stopping, then walking again. I followed them for nearly a mile before they suddenly stopped. No turnoffs, no branches broken, no prints going back. Just gone. That evening, I didn't set up my tent. I just kept walking until I was back at the car. I had planned to spend one more night out there, but I didn't care anymore. I needed to leave. I reached the trailhead just after sunset. My car was exactly where I left it, untouched. I got in, locked the doors, and drove straight to a hotel. The next morning, I looked over my gear. Everything was fine. Nothing was missing, but I noticed something strange on my map. A small mark that wasn't there before. Just a tiny dot made with pencil, placed along the trail near where I saw the figure. I didn't mark that. I don't know who did. I still don't know what I saw out there. Maybe it was just another hiker who didn't want to talk. Maybe it was someone messing around. But I know how I felt. I haven't gone hiking alone since then. Not because of what I saw, but because of how the whole place felt. Silent, still, and like something was always just out of sight. And whoever made that mark on my map, they were close enough to go through my stuff without me noticing. That's what really scared me. Not a bear, not getting lost, but knowing that someone was out there watching, and I never heard a thing. I've always loved hiking. There's something about being far away from everything that makes me feel alive. No traffic sounds, no phone signals, just the sound of my boots pressing into the dirt, birds calling from somewhere high in the trees, and the wind brushing over the leaves. I grew up hiking with my dad. He taught me how to read maps, how to follow tree markings, how to pack just enough food and water. I always thought I was careful. I always thought I knew what I was doing. But all it took was one bad decision to almost ruin everything. This happened 2 summers ago. I had taken a week off work to hike a long trail through a remote forest range in the north. It wasn't one of the big famous national parks, just a lesser-known trail system that didn't see many visitors. That was the appeal. I wanted peace. I wanted to walk for days and barely see another person. I planned a 5-day loop that would take me deep into the woods, with marked campsites along the way. I had my pack ready, water filter, food for a week, a reliable GPS and map, and my small one-person tent. Everything was planned down to the last detail. The first 3 days were quiet and uneventful. I followed the trail as it twisted through the hills, crossed creeks, and dipped into valleys. The weather held up. I saw deer, heard coyotes in the distance, and even found bear tracks near a stream, but I kept moving and stayed alert. On the 4th morning, I woke up early. The forest was foggy and damp. I could barely see 20 feet in any direction when I stepped out of the tent. The trail was still clear, though. It had rained a little during the night, so the ground was soft, but I wasn't worried. I ate a protein bar, filtered some water, packed up my gear, and started walking. My goal that day was to reach the 4th designated campsite by late afternoon. According to the map, I had about 15 kilometers to cover with a couple of elevation changes. It would be tiring, but nothing out of the ordinary. I kept a steady pace, stopping now and then to rest or drink. Around midday, I came to a fork I didn't remember from the map. The main trail clearly curved to the right and climbed uphill, but there was another narrow path that veered left, sloping down toward a thick patch of forest. The signpost was worn and broken. Only part of it was left, with faded paint that was too hard to read. I pulled out my map and GPS to double-check. The map didn't show a second path. According to the GPS, the main trail kept going uphill like I thought. But here's the thing, I thought I heard water coming from the left path. A distant rushing sound like a stream or maybe even a waterfall. I had enough water with me, but the idea of taking a short detour to refill near running water was tempting. It would save me time later. And besides, I was curious. That's what got me. Curiosity. I told myself I'd only go a few hundred meters down the side path to check it out. If it didn't lead anywhere, I'd turn back. The slope was steep at first, then leveled out as I walked deeper into the woods. The trees were thicker here, and the light dimmed. The sound of running water grew louder. I kept going. After about 15 minutes of walking, I saw it. A narrow creek cutting through mossy rocks, maybe 6 feet across, moving fast and cold. It wasn't marked on my map, but that didn't seem unusual. The map wasn't perfect. I crouched near the edge, filtered a full bottle of water, and splashed some on my face. It was refreshing. I sat there for a few minutes, enjoying the cool air and the quiet. That's when I noticed something. There was another trail on the far side of the creek. It was faint, but it was there. A depression in the leaves, a slight gap in the underbrush. It looked like it had once been a trail, maybe abandoned, maybe forgotten. My first thought was that it might be an old logging road, something not used anymore but still walkable. I don't know why I thought it would be a good idea to check it out. I already had a clear plan. I already had a mapped trail, but for some reason I felt pulled toward it. I crossed the creek carefully, hopping over wet stones, and stepped onto the other side. The trail, or what was left of it, wound through dense forest. It was darker here. The trees were taller, closer together. The air felt heavier, damp with the smell of rotting wood. I walked for maybe 10 minutes before I started to feel like I had made a mistake. The ground was soft and muddy, and the old trail was getting harder to follow. The only thing guiding me was the shape of the land. It seemed like something had been carved into the forest a long time ago. Maybe a hunting trail, but it was nearly gone now. I stopped, turned around, and tried to retrace my steps. That's when I realized I had lost the creek behind me. The sound of rushing water had faded. I walked back the way I thought I came, but nothing looked right. The trees all looked the same. The ground sloped in the wrong direction. I tried checking my GPS, but now the signal was spotty. I waited for it to connect, but it kept flashing no position. I took out my compass instead and tried to reorient myself. I knew the main trail was north of me, up the hill, so I turned and started climbing. The forest here was thicker than before. The branches clawed at my arms, and fallen logs blocked my path. I was breathing hard, sweat soaking my shirt. I kept moving, kept trying to find something familiar. But after almost an hour, I had to admit it to myself. I was lost. Panic set in slowly, like cold water filling up around my feet. At first, I told myself I'd find my way back. I just needed to keep going. But every step I took seemed to lead me deeper into nowhere. There were no trail markers, no signs of footprints, nothing man-made. Just endless trees, endless green and brown. I decided to stop and make camp right there. It was still early afternoon, but I didn't want to risk wandering farther. I set up my tent on the flattest ground I could find, filtered some water from a muddy puddle using my emergency filter, and tried to calm myself. I had food. I had shelter. I had a signal flare in my pack if things got really bad. I just needed to stay put and figure things out in the morning. But sleep didn't come easy. The forest sounded different at night, louder. The insects buzzed constantly, and branches creaked as the wind moved through. I kept hearing things, distant cracks, soft rustling. Once I even heard something heavy moving through the brush nearby. I gripped my knife and stayed still. Whatever it was eventually moved on. When morning came, the fog was thick again. I could barely see my own boots. I packed up quickly and decided to try going north again. I followed my compass, checking it constantly, making sure I didn't drift. But the forest was like a maze. The hills twisted in ways the map didn't show. Sometimes I'd climb for 20 minutes, only to find myself going downhill again. The trees seemed to close in tighter. By afternoon, I realized I was walking in circles. I found a broken branch I knew I had stepped over the day before. That crushed me. I sat down and just stared at the ground for a long time. I hadn't seen a trail marker in over a day. My GPS was useless out here. My phone battery was almost dead. The food was getting low. I rationed everything tightly. 1 energy bar in the morning, a handful of trail mix in the afternoon. I filtered whatever water I could find. I stopped lighting fires because I didn't want to attract animals. I only walked during daylight. At night, I set up camp and tried to stay warm, even though the nights were colder than they should have been for summer. By the 3rd day lost, I was exhausted. My legs ached. My feet were covered in blisters. My pack felt twice as heavy. I started seeing strange things. Shapes moving in the corner of my vision. Flashes of color that disappeared when I turned my head. I don't know if it was hunger, stress, or both. I started writing things down in my notebook, just in case I didn't make it. I kept notes of the direction I walked, landmarks I saw, anything that might help someone find me. Then, on the 4th lost day, I saw something. It was a structure hidden in the trees. A cabin, or maybe what was left of one. It looked abandoned. The roof caved in on one side, wood rotting, windows broken. But it was real. I approached slowly, checking for signs of life. Nothing. No smoke, no tracks, no sounds. I stepped inside. The floor was mostly dirt and broken boards. There was a rusty stove in one corner, a collapsed bed frame, and scattered trash that looked decades old. But I didn't care. It was shelter. I stayed there for the night. I even managed to sleep a little. The walls kept out the wind, and the air inside was warmer. In the morning, I climbed the nearest hill, hoping to get a better view of the area. I thought if I could just spot a clearing, a road, anything, I could find my way out. And from the top, I finally saw it. A narrow dirt road, winding far in the distance. It was barely visible through the trees, but it was there. My heart jumped. I marked the direction and climbed back down. Took the rest of the day to reach it. I had to fight through thick underbrush, climb over logs, cross a stream, and cut through dense growth. I've hiked a lot over the years. I never thought I'd say this, But there was one hike that almost made me give it all up. It wasn't because of a storm or a wild animal or getting lost. It was something different, something that still makes me feel sick when I think about it. I haven't told many people, but maybe writing it down will help me deal with it. It happened in late September 2022. I was 36 at the time. I had taken a week off work just to unplug. No phone, no laptop, just nature. I planned a solo hike in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana, not far from where I grew up. I had done hikes in that area before, but this time I wanted to try a ridge route I found on an old hiking forum. It wasn't on any official map. The post said it was a forgotten trail that followed an old fire lookout path from the 1950s. The pictures looked amazing. Long views, narrow paths, wild terrain. Just the kind of thing I liked. The post was over 10 years old, but it gave GPS coordinates to the starting point. I studied topo maps and satellite images before heading out. I printed a few copies and marked the rough trail path with a highlighter. I had a compass, a Garmin GPS device, and a paper map. I packed for 4 days enough food, stove, water purifier, 2 knives, bear spray, med kit, extra layers, and a tent with a solid rain fly. I double-checked everything. The drive to the trailhead took over 6 hours from my home in Bozeman. I arrived late in the afternoon and camped in my car that night. The next morning, I parked just off a forest road where the GPS said the trailhead was. There was no official parking area, just a wide patch of dirt next to some trees. No other cars, no signs, nothing man-made. It was cool that morning, mid-40s, and there was a light wind. I had that quiet feeling in my chest I always get before a big hike. I pulled on my pack and started in. The first few miles were steep but manageable. The terrain was mostly forest, with pine needles crunching underfoot and the occasional patch of moss. I followed what looked like an old trail. It was faint but still there, sometimes just a narrow depression in the soil, sometimes marked by older cut logs or stone cairns. After 3 hours, the trees started to thin and the ground rose sharply. I broke through the tree line just after noon. The view opened wide. Sharp ridges extended in both directions, with pale gray granite underfoot and patches of brush and dry grass. I stopped to eat some jerky and trail mix, then kept going. The ridge section was beautiful, like something out of a postcard, but it was also more difficult than I expected. The trail was barely there. Sometimes it would disappear for half a mile, and I had to use my compass and GPS to get back on track. There were steep drop-offs on either side, and at some points I had to scramble over boulders using my hands. My legs were shaking from the effort by late afternoon. I found a decent spot to set up camp that evening, flat enough to sleep and not too exposed. I boiled some water, made a freeze-dried meal, and watched the sky turn orange and purple. It was quiet except for the wind and the occasional hawk overhead. I felt tired but satisfied. This was exactly the kind of isolation I had wanted. I woke early the next morning and packed up quickly. My plan was to cover more ground that day, maybe 10 to 12 miles. The air was colder, and I noticed more clouds than the day before. I pushed on, following the ridgeline, checking my GPS every so often. Around mid-morning, I saw something that made me stop. It was a piece of clothing, a black fleece jacket, lying on a rock just off the trail. It looked fairly new, no rips or stains. I walked over and picked it up. No ID or tags, just a plain black jacket, size medium. Felt weird. I hadn't seen any signs of people since I started. No footprints, no garbage, nothing. I looked around, but there was no one nearby. No campsites, no gear, no sign of struggle. Just the jacket. I figured someone must have lost it during a hike, maybe months ago. Still, it felt odd. I folded it and set it back on the rock where I found it. About 2 hours later, I found more stuff. A metal water bottle, clean, full, sitting upright under a small pine tree. Nearby, a pair of sunglasses. Both looked modern and well-kept. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I kept moving, but the rest of the day felt different. I kept looking over my shoulder. My steps felt slower. I made camp earlier than planned, near a small alpine lake tucked in a dip below the ridge. The wind had picked up by then, and clouds were rolling in fast. That night was rough. I heard strange noises outside my tent. Not animals, not wind, just short, hard taps. Once it sounded like something brushed against the side of the tent. I held my knife and sat up for an hour, just listening. But there was nothing when I looked. I woke up groggy and stiff. My Garmin showed I had another 15 miles to go before I reached the point where the old trail supposedly dropped down into a Forest Service road loop. I was planning to hike that full length, then follow the loop back to my car over the next day. The morning fog was thick. I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead for hours. It felt like walking through a tunnel. Around noon, the fog lifted just enough for me to spot something odd again. This time, a boot. A single hiking boot, upright with the laces neatly tied. It wasn't dirty or torn. It was placed deliberately. I didn't touch it. I took a photo on my GPS device and kept walking. That afternoon, I made a mistake. I followed a side path I thought would cut off a sharp bend on the ridge. It looked good at first, more level, easier going. But half a mile in, the trail just disappeared. Completely. No path, no footprints, just rough ground and thick brush. I checked my GPS and saw that I had drifted too far east. I tried to backtrack, but I couldn't find the same way. The brush was thicker than I remembered. I ended up scrambling down a steep slope that tore open one of my sleeves and scraped my arms bloody. I finally hit flatter ground near dusk, but I was off trail by at least 2 miles. My GPS showed the ridge path above me and to the west. I was stuck in a low basin filled with dead trees, rocks, and dry undergrowth. There was no flat space to camp. I had no choice but to keep walking, even though the light was almost gone. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. I saw movement between the trees, just a flicker. I stopped and waited. Nothing. Then again, about 50 yards ahead, something moved behind a tree. Not fast like an animal, slower, heavier. I didn't hear footsteps, but I felt watched. I called out. Nothing answered. I held my bear spray and knife in hand and kept walking, fast but careful. The sun was gone now. The basin turned dark quick, and I had to use my headlamp. The beam cut through the dark in a narrow cone, everything beyond it pitch black. Something followed me. I never saw it clearly, but I heard it. Branches cracking, dry grass rustling, always about 20 or 30 feet behind. If I stopped, it stopped. If I turned off my light and crouched, it would move again. Just once, like a single heavy footstep. I didn't run. I knew running would be worse. I walked steadily for an hour until I found a slanted rock ledge and crouched behind it. I didn't set up my tent. I didn't even eat. I sat with my back against the rock, holding my knife, headlamp off, listening. I barely slept that night. When dawn broke, everything was quiet. Nothing around. I checked my GPS. I was still off course, but not too far now. Maybe 4 miles east of the old fire route. I climbed out of the basin and made it back to the ridge path around mid-morning. I was exhausted but moving fast now. I didn't take breaks. I just wanted out. By late afternoon, I reached the point where the old trail began to slope downward. That was supposed to connect to a forest road I could follow back to my car. I was about to relax, finally, when I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Another camp, but not normal. There was a tent, brand new, green, dome-shaped, no name on it, and it was flattened, like someone had crushed it. Not torn, not old, just stomped down. Next to it, a sleeping bag, half-zipped, laid out on the ground like someone had been inside it and just vanished. And next to that, a hatchet, stuck in the dirt, blade down. It wasn't rusted. It wasn't dirty. It was shiny and sharp. I turned and left immediately. The trail down to the forest road was rough and narrow. I moved fast but careful. I kept hearing things behind me, short, sudden noises, but I didn't stop. When I finally reached the gravel road, I nearly dropped to my knees in relief. I hiked it for 3 more hours until I reached the parking area where I had planned to loop back around. My car was still a day's hike away, but I didn't care. I used my Garmin's satellite emergency text to message a friend and ask them to pick me up at a ranger station 20 miles down the road. I told them it was urgent. They picked me up the next morning. I don't know what it is about hiking alone that always gave me a strange sense of comfort. Maybe it's the quiet, or the feeling of being away from everything, away from traffic, away from my phone, away from people. That silence makes room for my thoughts to wander. I always thought I was safer out in the woods than walking through any city at night. I believed that for years, but that changed last summer. It was late August. The air was still thick and warm, but not unbearable. I had taken a week off work, mostly to reset and get away. I didn't want to go far. I didn't want to plan anything big. I just wanted to be out in the woods again. So I picked a trail I'd heard of a few times, Flat Rock Ridge Trail. It wasn't a loop trail, just a long, steady uphill hike that followed a series of ridges, cutting through forest and some exposed clearings with views of the valley below. It was about 18 miles long one way. Not the hardest hike I'd done, but not the easiest either. I planned to do the full length in one day, then camp at the end and hike back down the next. I parked my car at the south trailhead around 6:45 in the morning. There were a few other cars there, but not many. I adjusted my pack, tent, sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, extra clothes, water filter, first aid kit, GPS, all of it. I had been hiking long enough to know what to carry. Nothing was missing. I checked my GPS and got moving. The first few miles were easy, mostly shaded, with tall pine and spruce trees lining both sides of the narrow dirt path. I passed a couple of hikers going the opposite way, probably early risers who had camped further up the trail. We nodded to each other and kept moving. The morning light filtered through the trees in patches. Birds were out, felt peaceful. By mid-morning, I'd already covered about 6 miles. My legs felt good. I stopped at a small stream and used my water filter to refill one of my bottles. I took a few minutes to eat a protein bar and stretch. Then I moved on. The trail climbed a bit after that, winding up a rocky ridge that gave me a nice view of the tree line behind me. The breeze up there felt cooler, and I could see clouds gathering in the distance. Not storm clouds, just a haze building over the mountains. I kept a steady pace. Around 1:30 p.m., I'd made it almost 13 miles in. I knew I was more than 2/3 of the way up, but my legs were starting to feel it. My shoulders too. That was when I came to a fork in the trail. There weren't any signs, no blazes, no markers. One path continued up the ridge, winding around the hill like the one I'd been on. The other looked like a smaller trail, rougher, a bit overgrown, but heading in the same general direction, just more steeply and directly uphill. I stood there for a while, sweating under my pack, and checked my GPS. The device showed the main trail wrapping around the ridge for another few miles before reaching the camp area near the summit. The smaller trail wasn't even on the map, but if it went straight up, it could save me at least an hour. That was my mistake. I knew better than to take trails that weren't marked, but I was tired, and I thought maybe it was a game trail that locals used as a shortcut. I figured I'd shave some time and still make it to the campsite before dusk. So I took it. The trail was rough from the start. Roots jutted out in all directions, and patches of the ground were soft, like they hadn't seen boots in months. I had to push branches out of my way. Some thorn bushes scratched at my legs, but I pressed on. I kept checking the GPS. I wasn't far off the main trail, maybe a quarter mile to the east. And the trail, if you could call it that, kept going uphill. I thought I was on track. About 30 minutes in, I stopped to catch my breath. That's when I noticed it had gone quiet. No wind, no birds, no rustling of animals through the brush. Just me breathing, hard. I listened for a minute. Still nothing. That should have been another red flag, but I brushed it off. I chalked it up to being higher in elevation. Less animal life, maybe. I pushed forward. Then the trail just stopped. 1 minute I was following a narrow dirt track. The next I was standing in knee-high weeds with nothing but trees and rocks in front of me. No sign of the trail. No footprints. No tire marks. Just empty forest. I turned around, thinking maybe I missed a turn, but the way behind me was barely visible too. It all looked the same. Pine needles on the ground. Scattered branches. Everything blending into itself. I pulled out my GPS. The main trail was still a little west of me, probably less than half a mile. I figured I could just bushwhack in that direction until I hit it. I marked a point and started moving. It was harder than I thought. The slope was steeper here. I had to climb over fallen logs, dense brush, and boulders. At one point, I slid down a short incline and scraped my forearm. Nothing bad, but enough to sting. I wiped off the dirt, took a drink, and kept going. But the further I walked, the more everything around me started to look the same. I couldn't tell if I was going in circles or just walking through identical-looking forest. My GPS still showed I was heading the right direction, but it didn't match what I was seeing. No trail, no ridge, no clearing, just dense forest closing in tighter. That was when I started to feel the unease. It was like something was off. Not broken ankle or bear attack kind of danger, but something quieter, more subtle, just wrong. I kept looking behind me, even though I didn't hear anything. I started hearing my own footsteps louder than usual, like the forest was sucking up all the other sounds. I picked up the pace even though I was breathing harder. The forest felt darker. The trees leaned over the path I was making, and I kept tripping on roots I didn't see. Then I stepped on something soft. I looked down. It was a dead bird. A small one, maybe a jay or a warbler. Its neck was twisted, wings splayed open, body untouched, just lying there like it dropped from the sky. I walked around it fast. I checked my GPS again. I was supposed to be almost on top of the main trail, but there was nothing, no sign of it, just more forest. I should have stopped right then, backtracked, found higher ground, but I didn't. I kept walking. A few minutes later, I saw something ahead. At first, I thought it was just rocks, but as I got closer, I realized it was an old wooden structure, a sort of hunting blind, maybe, raised up on 4 legs, half rotted, the wood gray and broken. It was only about 6 feet tall. The ladder was gone. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The roof had caved in on one side. I didn't get too close. I didn't want to know what was inside. I walked around it and kept moving, but that uneasy feeling was stronger now. I kept looking over my shoulder. My mouth was dry, and my legs were starting to cramp. I decided to take a break. I sat on a fallen log and pulled out a protein bar. I didn't finish it. I couldn't stop scanning the trees. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every creak sounded too close. Then I heard something. It wasn't loud, just a single branch cracking. Not under my foot, not under anything near me, but behind me, maybe 50 yards back. I froze. I didn't move for almost a minute. My ears were ringing with silence. I slowly stood up, slid my pack back on, and started walking. Not fast, not slow, just steady. 10 minutes later, I heard it again, closer. I still hadn't found the main trail. I started doubting the GPS. I couldn't even tell what direction I was facing anymore. The sun was hidden by trees and clouds. Everything was gray. Then I saw a clearing. It looked like a dry riverbed, wide, filled with smooth stones, some shrubs and patches of tall grass. I figured if I followed it, it might lead me somewhere, maybe even cross the trail. So I stepped into it. The air felt colder there, like it dropped 10 degrees. The wind picked up, and for a moment I felt exposed. No trees around me now, just the open clearing. That's when I looked back and saw movement in the trees. It was just a flash, a shadow ducking behind a trunk. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, but it didn't move like a deer. It moved upright. I didn't wait to see more. I picked up the pace, walking faster, then jogging. My boots slammed into the rocks, and I slipped twice, almost falling. I could hear twigs snapping behind me, off to the side. That was when I started running. I ran harder than I ever had before. My pack bounced on my back. Branches tore at my arms. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to move. Eventually, I found a hill and climbed it, grabbing at roots and stones. I collapsed at the top, gasping for breath. When I looked down, I finally saw it, the trail. The real one. The marked path, wide and clean, winding through the trees below. I scrambled down the slope and hit the trail running. I didn't stop until I reached a signpost. It pointed left to the campsite, 1 mile ahead. I wasn't new to hiking. I had done most of the trails around the Pacific Northwest over the last 5 years. Some solo, some with friends. This one, though, was supposed to be special. It was deep in Oregon, part of a series of remote trails called the White Elk Loop, known for its thick forest, steep elevation gain, and the fact that hardly anyone hikes it due to how far off the grid it is. I had a week off work and figured I'd spend it disconnected. No cell service, no emails, no noise. Just me and nature. I brought everything I needed. A large pack, freeze-dried food, water filter, small cook set, tent, compass, physical map, knife, bear spray, and backup battery packs. I had been prepping for this trip for over 2 months. The plan was simple. Hike the full 42-mile loop over 4 days. I'd set up camp each night at marked sites on the map and keep track of my bearings using my compass and map. I had my GPS watch on me too, but I knew not to rely on it completely. The morning I arrived at the trailhead, it was foggy and cold. The lot was empty. My car was the only one. That's how remote it was. I knew I wouldn't see anyone else for days. I parked, made sure the car was locked tight, and wrote down my expected return date on a piece of paper I left on the dash, just in case. I didn't tell many people about the trip. Just a coworker and my brother, and I only gave them a general idea. Day 1 was calm. I hiked about 11 miles, mostly uphill through mossy forest. Huge pine trees stood all around me, quiet and still. The air was crisp, damp, and filled with the smell of wet bark and decaying leaves. Birds chirped above. I set up my tent near a small stream and spent the night comfortably. No problems. Day 2 started fine. I continued along the loop, climbing higher. The terrain grew more rugged. The trail became narrower, and there were places where it disappeared into overgrowth. I used the map and compass carefully, double-checking everything. Around midday, I heard rustling in the woods about 20 yards off the trail. I stopped and waited. It was probably a deer. It moved away quickly. I kept going. Then, about an hour later, I made a mistake that would cost me more than I realized at the time. I came across a fork in the trail that wasn't marked on my map. The main path curved to the left, clearly worn down, but there was another, thinner trail heading to the right. It looked less used, but not completely abandoned. I looked at my map again. Nothing about a split at this point, but I thought maybe it had been added recently or was a side route that looped back. Curious, I decided to take it. I figured I'd go a short way and turn around if it led nowhere. Started out fine. The path sloped downhill slightly. I moved through thick trees, stepping over fallen logs and ducking under low branches. I walked maybe half a mile before I realized the trail was starting to fade. The ground looked less walked on. Bushes started to grow across it. I thought maybe it would clear ahead, so I pushed on. Eventually, the trail just stopped. Nothing ahead but dense forest. No clearing, no signs, just trees in every direction. When I turned to go back, I realized something strange. I couldn't see the trail I came in on. Everything looked the same. Tree trunks, ferns, moss. I spun slowly, trying to remember which direction I had come from, but the forest looked identical on all sides. I started walking back in what I thought was the direction of the trail, but it didn't take long before I noticed I wasn't getting anywhere. I took a deep breath and checked the compass. I knew the main trail had headed generally north, so I figured if I backtracked south or southwest, I'd eventually hit it again. I started moving, pushing through underbrush, marking trees with my knife every few feet. An hour passed, then another. Still no sign of the original path. I knew I wasn't supposed to panic, so I sat down, drank some water, and tried to calm myself. I pulled out the map and looked again. No help. The unmarked trail had thrown everything off. My surroundings didn't match anything on the map anymore. I was somewhere in the middle of uncharted forest, and my GPS watch had stopped tracking properly because of the heavy tree cover. Still, I told myself I could find my way back. By evening, I accepted that I was lost. I found a semi-flat spot to pitch my tent and boiled water for food. I tried to sleep but kept waking up. Every crack of a twig outside made me sit up straight. I kept the bear spray close and my knife within reach. The next morning, I decided I'd hike in a straight line west. According to the map, a river ran west of the loop. If I could reach it, I could follow it downstream until I found a crossing or sign of people. That plan lasted maybe 3 hours. The terrain got brutal. Fallen logs, steep slopes, thick brambles. I cut my arm on a sharp branch and had to wrap it. I kept trying to walk straight, but the forest twisted me around. I had to go up hills, around boulders, through thick brush. It was slow and exhausting. By afternoon, it started raining. Not heavy at first, but enough to soak through my clothes and chill me. I set up camp again, soaked and tired. That night was worse. Something moved near my tent. I heard it just past midnight. Soft footsteps, maybe 10 feet away. Then a grunt, low and deep. My heart started racing. I didn't move. I held my breath. The sound passed after a few minutes, fading into the woods. Probably a deer again, I told myself. Maybe a bear. But the truth is, I didn't know. And not knowing was worse than anything. The fourth day was a blur of walking, slipping, crawling. I kept trying to find the river, but I wasn't even sure I was going west anymore. My compass still worked, but the forest forced me to zigzag constantly. I lost track of time. My legs ached. My back hurt from the pack. I had enough food for maybe 3 more days if I rationed, but water was becoming harder to find. Streams were dry or filled with mud. That night, I found a strange clearing. It wasn't big, maybe 15 feet across. In the middle was an old rusted metal drum. Around it were half-buried beer cans and broken glass bottles. Signs that people had been there years ago. I looked around for a trail or path, but there was nothing. The place felt off. I didn't stay. I kept moving, even in the dark, with my headlamp on. I ended up sleeping just off the base of a hill under a ledge. It wasn't comfortable, but it kept the rain off. On day 5, I woke up to blood on my sock. A leech had gotten into my boot. I hadn't noticed. My ankle was swollen and sore. I cleaned it best I could and wrapped it tight. But walking became harder. Every step hurt. That day, I made the worst mistake yet. I saw a tall ridge that looked like it might give me a view over the trees. If I could climb it, maybe I could spot the river or a road. So I started climbing. The slope was steep and slippery with moss. I used tree roots and rocks to pull myself up. Halfway up, I slipped and scraped my hand badly on a rock. Blood ran down my wrist. I almost fell back, but caught myself. At the top, the view was worse than I expected. Just more forest in every direction. No river, no trail, no smoke, no buildings, just endless green. I wanted to scream. Climbing down was worse. My foot slipped and I fell the last 10 feet, landing hard. I rolled my ankle and felt a sharp jolt of pain. I screamed and lay there for a while, clutching my leg. The pain was intense. I had to crawl for the rest of the day. I made it only half a mile before I found a tree I could lean against and sleep. That night, I ran out of food. The next day, I chewed on pine nuts and drank from a muddy puddle after filtering it. I knew I had to do something fast. My body was getting weaker. I was losing weight. My leg throbbed constantly. On day 7, I spotted something. A torn blue tarp caught in a tree. I limped over and found what looked like a collapsed old campsite. Broken tent poles, shredded canvas, and empty cans. No sign of the person who left it. No notes. No gear worth saving. Just rot and rust. But nearby, I found something that gave me a spark of hope. A trail marker. It was old and faded, nailed to a tree. But it was real. I followed it, slowly, dragging my injured foot. After about an hour, I found another. Then another. Eventually, I found a trail. Not the original loop trail, but a real one. One that had seen boots recently. I followed it. That night, I slept near the trail and set an alarm on my watch every 2 hours to stay awake in case I missed someone passing. But no one came. Day 8, I kept moving. My foot was bad, purple and swollen, but I pushed through the pain. Midday, I heard it, a truck, faint through the trees. I limped toward the sound, and after maybe 30 minutes, I stumbled out onto a dirt service road, collapsed right there. 10 minutes later, a forest ranger truck rolled up and stopped. The ranger got out and helped me into the truck. I couldn't even speak properly, just tears, water, and mumbled things. I've always been the kind of person who liked being alone in nature, not just little walks around the neighborhood or visiting crowded parks. I liked the deep, remote kind of solitude, the kind that made you forget traffic sounds, ringing phones, and even time. Over the years, I got into hiking and then backpacking and then full-on multi-day treks into places where most people never go. It made me feel like I was doing something real, something that mattered. Every trip made me feel more experienced, smarter, tougher. But one trip taught me how quickly things can go wrong, how small and helpless you can feel when you're too deep to call for help, and when your biggest enemy is your own overconfidence. It was the last week of September. I was in Colorado, taking time off work to get in one last long hike before winter closed in on the high elevation trails. I had done a lot of research and picked a route that looped through the San Juan Mountains, about 42 miles total, planned over 4 days. It was remote, but not unheard of. I read a couple blogs, checked topo maps, and packed enough gear to last me an extra day or two just in case. I brought a lightweight tent, enough food, water filters, maps, a compass, and even a PLB, personal locator beacon. I had everything I thought I needed. The first day was smooth. I started around 9 a.m. from the small trailhead parking lot where maybe 3 or 4 other cars were sitting. The trail climbed slowly at first, leading me through thick forest. The air was crisp, and the aspens were already glowing yellow. There were signs of elk all around, fresh tracks, droppings, and even a few distant bugles echoing from the hills. I made great time, hiking around 12 miles before stopping to set up camp near a creek. It got cold at night, but I had a good sleeping bag and layered up. I lay in my tent feeling proud and content, listening to the soft wind moving through the trees. The second day, things started to feel different. I woke up to frost on the inside of the tent. It was colder than I expected. My water bottles had a thin layer of ice on top. I boiled some for oatmeal and coffee, packed up, and continued climbing. The trail grew steeper, thinner. I passed above the tree line by mid-morning, into a wide open alpine zone with nothing but grass, rock, and a distant snow-dusted ridgeline. It was beautiful but exposed. There was no shelter anywhere. The wind picked up, and it wasn't gentle anymore. It was biting, sharp, coming in gusts that made me brace myself and lean into it to stay upright. Around noon, the clouds rolled in, fast. I checked the barometer on my watch. The pressure had dropped sharply over the past 3 hours. I kept walking, thinking I could make it over the ridge and back down into some trees before it got bad. That was a mistake. By the time I reached the ridge, it had started to snow. Not lightly either. The kind of snow that comes down hard and sideways, driven by wind. My visibility dropped fast. I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. I pulled out my map, trying to find the side trail that cut left down toward a lower basin. But the trail had disappeared under fresh snow. I checked the compass, squinted through the white, and kept moving slowly. My jacket flapped violently. I was cold now. I hadn't thought it would get this bad, this fast. I walked for nearly 2 hours across the open ridge, trying to find the descent point. I slipped twice on loose rock covered in snow. The wind howled so loud I couldn't hear my own footsteps. Finally, I spotted what looked like a drop-off, and I thought I'd found the trail. I began to descend slowly, carefully. My trekking poles helped, but I still had to slide in spots. The snow was sticking now, building up on my pack, soaking into my gloves. After a steep half-mile, I entered a narrow, forested valley. The trees here were dark and dense. The snow had reached the ground, mixing with mud and wet leaves. The terrain was rough, fallen logs, boulders, sudden drops. I had no idea if I was on a trail anymore. I checked my map again. Nothing matched up. I looked at my compass. South-southwest. That was wrong. I should have been heading southeast. Somewhere along that ridge, I had taken the wrong descent. I cursed myself, loudly, not that anyone could hear. The thought of climbing back up to the ridge in that storm was almost laughable. The snow was still falling hard, and the wind up there would be worse now. I was committed to this valley whether I liked it or not. I decided to keep heading down. Valleys almost always lead to something: streams, roads, maybe even another trail. I followed a narrow runoff channel that looked like it had carried water recently. It was muddy, slick, but it ran in a steady direction. I told myself I'd follow it for a few miles, then stop to reassess. Hours passed. My legs started to ache. My knees felt sore from the constant downhill pounding. I slipped several times and got wet up to my thighs crossing a freezing stream. It was late afternoon now, and the sky had darkened again. I hadn't seen a sign of a trail, blaze, or marker in hours. Eventually, I stopped near a cluster of large boulders and thick pine trees. I was soaked, cold, and hungry. I set up my tent on the flattest spot I could find and crawled inside, my hands numb. I peeled off my wet socks, trying to dry them near my small camping stove as I boiled water for a dehydrated meal. My fingertips were red and swollen. The inside of my boots were soaked. That night, I barely slept. The wind pushed through the trees, howling in short bursts, then dying down, then returning again like breath. The temperature kept dropping. My sleeping bag felt damp. At some point, I drifted into a restless sleep and woke up shivering hard. In the morning, I looked at the map again and tried to guess where I had ended up. I was in some unnamed valley, running west. That wasn't where I wanted to be. I could see the slope climbing on either side. No signs of human activity anywhere, no old fire rings, no cut logs, nothing. Just deep wilderness. I packed up and started walking again, still following the valley downhill. My legs were stiff, my back ached, and my feet were cold and blistered. Around midday, I heard a sound that made my heart jump. Running water, a bigger stream. I followed it, hoping it might lead me to some kind of logging road or trail crossing. Didn't. Instead, it grew deeper and faster, carving a trench through the forest, making travel harder. I tried to walk along its edge, but the terrain forced me to bushwhack through thick undergrowth. Branches scraped my face, tore at my pack. I was burning more calories than I had. I stopped more often to eat granola, nuts, anything I could find in my bag. I was already rationing food by that point. By the fourth night, I was scared, truly scared. I hadn't seen another person. No trails, no roads. My map meant nothing here. My GPS had failed, frozen, then glitched, then died completely. I kept it wrapped in clothes, but the cold had drained the batteries. My PLB still worked, but I didn't want to use it yet. I told myself I could get out on my own. I didn't want to be that guy, the hiker who hit the button and got a helicopter ride out because he made a wrong turn. But that night, lying awake in my tent, I admitted to myself that I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how far off the route I'd gone. I didn't know if this valley would lead anywhere at all. I started to think about the worst-case scenario. If I twisted an ankle, if my stove failed, if I ran out of food. I thought about hypothermia, about dying alone in some nameless ravine and being found next spring by some hunter. The fifth day, I woke up and knew I had to make a choice. Either keep going and hope I hit a road, or set off my beacon. My pride still held me back. I ate the last full meal I had and kept walking. Late in the afternoon, I found something that gave me a flicker of hope. A footprint. Just one, partially melted in the snow, but it was fresh. Someone else had been here, maybe within a day or two. I scanned the area and found more, faint tracks heading northeast, uphill. I decided to follow them. The climb was steep and brutal. My legs screamed. My breath came in clouds. I pushed myself harder than I ever had. I had no idea where the tracks were going, but they were human, and I hadn't seen that in nearly 5 days. It meant something. I followed the tracks over the ridge, and when I reached the top, I saw the best thing I'd seen in my life: a dirt road. Just a thin, winding trail, probably used by hunters or logging trucks, but it was something. I broke down crying right there on the slope. I followed the road for hours, not even feeling the pain anymore, just walking. Around dusk, I saw a trail sign nailed to a tree. The name meant nothing to me, but it proved what I already hoped. I was on a known route again. I walked all night. My flashlight barely lit the path, but I kept going. Around 2 a.m., I saw headlights. A pickup truck bounced down the road, slowed when it saw me, and stopped. I didn't even wave. I just stood there. The man inside offered me water and I've always liked hiking alone. Something about being in the middle of nowhere with nothing but trees, rocks, and dirt makes me feel more in control than I usually do in life. It's quiet, still. It makes sense. I don't have to think about bills or emails or people. Just keep walking, keep breathing, keep going. Last summer, I planned a solo trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains. Not the most remote place on Earth, but big enough to feel like you've dropped off the map for a few days. I picked a lesser-used trail I found online. It wasn't on the park's main list, just a blog post written by someone who found it by accident. According to the post, the trail used to be part of an old logging road that was shut down and forgotten after a few accidents in the 90s. Most people stuck to the popular trails. That's exactly why I chose this one. I started early in the morning. The sun was just coming up. The sky was a soft gray blue. The air was cool, and everything was quiet except for the birds. I parked my truck at the edge of an old dirt road where the trail supposedly began. No signs, no markers, just a small break in the trees. It looked like a deer path, but I trusted the GPS coordinates from the blog. I double-checked my gear. A loaded pack, plenty of water, dried food, a small emergency tent, first aid kit, headlamp, extra batteries, knife, bear spray, compass, and a paper map. I also kept a flare in my pack, just in case. The first few miles were easy. The trail wound through the forest and slowly climbed in elevation. It didn't look like many people had walked it recently. Grass and ferns had grown over most of it, and sometimes I had to push through thickets to keep going. Around midday, I stopped at a clearing where I found an old fire ring, just a circle of blackened rocks and a few beer cans someone had left behind. I ate a protein bar and drank water while sitting on a log, watching the treetops sway in the wind. I kept moving after that, wanting to make good time before the sun dipped low. The further I went, the less like a trail it looked. At some points, I wasn't even sure I was on it anymore. But the land kept sloping upward in a way that matched the topography on my paper map, so I followed the terrain. I found broken branches and scuffed rocks that told me someone had been through recently. Maybe animals, maybe people. As the afternoon stretched on, I started getting this weird feeling. Not fear exactly, more like discomfort. I started checking over my shoulder more often. I didn't see or hear anything out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The woods were just too quiet. I'm used to silence, but this was different. There was no wind, no bird calls, no rustling. Just the sound of my boots on dirt and the distant ticking of insects. By late afternoon, I'd hiked almost 10 miles. I found a small ledge that overlooked a deep ravine and decided to set up camp nearby. I didn't want to keep going after dark, especially with how faint the trail had become. I cleared a flat spot beneath a group of pines, pitched my emergency tent, and got a small fire going. I heated up some canned beans and sat on a rock, eating slowly as I watched the light drain from the trees. I should have felt calm, but that feeling hadn't gone away. That night was rough. I barely slept. Every little sound made me sit up and listen. I heard twigs snapping, but never saw anything. Could have been deer, raccoons, even a bear. Still, the way the sounds stopped the moment I moved felt unnatural. Like something or someone was deliberately waiting for me to be still again. My heart pounded every time it happened. At one point, I thought I heard slow footsteps circling the tent. Not fast, not panicked, just slow and steady, crunching leaves and then pausing. I didn't call out. I didn't open the flap. I just laid there, holding my knife in one hand, bear spray in the other, trying not to breathe too loud. After what felt like an hour, it stopped. Total silence again. In the morning, I stepped out of the tent and looked around. Nothing was disturbed. No footprints, no claw marks, nothing missing. Just the same woods, the same sky, and the same sense that something was watching. I packed quickly and got moving. I figured I could finish the loop and get back to the truck by nightfall if I kept a steady pace. But the trail, or what was left of it, started leading me into steeper, rougher ground. By midday, I was scrambling over boulders and sliding down loose dirt. My legs were scratched and tired. I stopped for lunch near a dry creek bed. That's when I noticed the boot print. It was fresh, a single tread pressed into the soft dirt near the creek. Not mine. I checked my own boots to compare. The pattern didn't match. This one was deeper too, like the person was heavier. I looked around, scanning the trees. Nothing. I listened again. Silence. But that feeling was back, stronger than before. I picked up the pace after that. I kept thinking I heard movement behind me. Branches snapping, faint steps. Once I even thought I saw something move between the trees. But when I stopped and stared, there was nothing there. I told myself I was being paranoid, but it didn't help. I was sweating hard, not just from the heat, but from nerves. Around 4 in the afternoon, I came across something that stopped me cold. It was an old camp, not a modern one. This looked abandoned for years. A rotted canvas tent, collapsed in on itself. A rusted lantern half buried in dirt. Some old gear scattered around, covered in moss and leaves. I found a metal cup with initials scratched into the side, but they didn't mean anything to me. There were even bones nearby. Not human, looked like deer, but they were clean, picked dry. I didn't want to linger. Something about the scene gave me a bad feeling in my gut. I kept going, pushing harder. My legs ached. My back throbbed from the pack, but I wanted to get out. I stopped checking the map. I just followed the slope, hoping it would lead me back toward the truck. As the sun started going down, I realized I was lost. The terrain didn't match anything on my map. No landmarks I recognized. The ravine was gone. The slope was wrong. Even the trees looked different, closer together, darker, older. I checked my compass. North kept shifting, like something was messing with the needle. I tried my GPS, but the signal was gone. I set up camp again, even though I didn't want to stop. I hadn't seen another boot print since the creek, but that feeling hadn't gone away. I made a fire bigger than the last one. I stayed up late, scanning the woods, knife in hand, bear spray at my side. I thought about the flare but decided to save it. Still, I kept it close. At some point in the night, I dozed off. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke to the smell of smoke. My fire was nearly out, just glowing embers. I sat up, ears straining. That's when I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time, not just circling, but approaching. I grabbed the flare and yanked the cap off, lighting it. Red light burst out, harsh and flickering. I waved it around. The woods lit up in shades of blood and shadow. For a second, I thought I saw someone, just a shape, step behind a tree. Tall, still, watching. But when I moved the flare back, they were gone. I didn't sleep after that. I waited for dawn, then packed up and started moving. I didn't care what direction. I just needed to get out. I drank most of my water, ate 2 bars while walking. My hands were shaking. Every sound made my heart race. I don't know how long I hiked. Hours, maybe more. Then I heard something I hadn't heard in days. The distant sound of a car. Faint but real. I pushed toward it, crashing through brush and branches until I broke through onto another dirt road. It wasn't the same one I came in on, but it was a road. Real. I followed it. About 2 miles later, I reached a hunting shack with a faded American flag out front. No one was there, but there was a rain barrel full of water and a map nailed to the wall. I found the nearest highway on it, oriented myself, and started walking. Another 6 miles later, I found a ranger station. They gave me food, water, and a ride back to my truck. When I got back, my truck was untouched. No signs of anyone around. I checked the area for footprints, but didn't find anything. It was like none of it happened. I didn't report it. What would I even say? That someone followed me through the woods without ever being seen? I still hike, but never alone anymore, and never off the main trail. Some places are meant to be left alone. Some paths were closed for a reason. And that trail? I went back to find the blog post about it. Gone. Deleted. like it was never there. It was early October when I decided to take a solo hiking trip through a part of the Rockies I hadn't explored before. I had time off work, and I needed to disconnect from everything: city noise, emails, people. I spent 2 weeks planning the route, reading about the terrain, and packing every item with care. My plan was to hike a loop trail starting from a small trailhead that barely showed up on most maps. The trail was remote, not very popular, but not completely unknown either. That was exactly what I wanted. Quiet, solitude, no distractions. The first 2 days went smoothly. The sky stayed clear, and the air was crisp, cool enough to make hiking feel refreshing. The trail was peaceful, winding through pine forests and rocky slopes. I saw some deer in the distance, a few squirrels, and the occasional hawk gliding overhead. My backpack was heavy, but manageable. I kept a steady pace, stopping only to eat, drink water, or check my map. At night, I set up my tent far from the trail. I preferred sleeping where no one could stumble upon me. By the third day, the terrain changed. I entered a narrower section of the forest where the trees grew denser and taller. The trail became uneven, filled with roots and loose rocks. I had to watch every step. There was no phone service, which I had expected, so I relied on my compass and printed maps. I wasn't worried. I had trained for this, done hikes in tougher places, but there was a feeling that crept in around noon that day. Not fear exactly, just a strange awareness, like something was different, like I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't see anyone. No tents, no gear left behind, no footprints that weren't mine. But the woods felt heavier, like the air had changed. I kept going. The plan was to reach a small alpine lake by late afternoon, camp there, and loop back the next morning. The lake was supposed to be quiet, beautiful, and surrounded by ridges that looked out over the valley. When I reached the area around 4 p.m., I realized it didn't look like the pictures I'd seen. The water was low, and the trees looked more weathered, twisted, and lifeless around the shore. The lake wasn't reflective or peaceful. It was dull and still, like it hadn't been touched in years. The area felt forgotten. I set up my camp anyway. I was tired and didn't want to backtrack. I boiled water, ate a meal, and sat on a rock near the water. I listened to the forest. No wind, no bugs, no birds, nothing. That night, I woke up sweating. It was cold outside, but I was burning up inside my sleeping bag. My ears were ringing slightly. I sat up, unzipped the tent door, and looked out. Pitch black. I clicked on my headlamp and scanned around. Nothing moved. The trees stood still. I drank some water, cooled off a bit, and tried to fall back asleep. But I couldn't. I kept thinking I heard soft crunching noises, like footsteps, but spaced far apart. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a moose or a deer, but it sounded too deliberate. Not like wandering, but like it had purpose. The next morning, I left earlier than planned. I packed up quickly, skipped breakfast, and followed the trail that would eventually lead me back in a wide loop. I kept glancing behind me, even though I knew it made no sense. It just didn't feel right. About 4 hours in, I came across something that really threw me. A jacket hanging from a tree branch, about 8 feet off the ground. It was dirty and torn. I stopped, scanned the ground. No backpack, no shoes, no other signs of someone. The jacket looked old, maybe a few years. Faded blue with a ripped sleeve. I took a photo of it with my camera and moved on. I hiked for hours that day, barely stopping to eat. I passed overgrown areas where the trail faded into thick brush. I used my compass and pushed forward. Around 3 p.m., it started raining lightly. I pulled on my poncho and kept moving. I knew there was a place marked on the map where I could camp. A clearing near a fallen rock formation about 6 miles ahead. I kept thinking about that jacket. Why would someone leave it hanging like that? And why so high? Even if it had been blown there by wind, the odds of it catching on that particular branch seemed weird. When I reached the clearing, I set up my tent quickly and tried to relax. The rain stopped, but the ground was wet and soft. I didn't want to light a fire in case the smoke drew attention. I ate a cold meal, checked my map again, and planned to finish the hike the next day. I was maybe 12 miles from the trailhead. That night was worse than the one before. I woke up just after midnight. I didn't hear anything at first, but I had this strong feeling that someone was standing outside my tent. I didn't move. I listened. Nothing. But I could feel it, that instinct that something is watching. I finally gathered the courage to unzip the tent slowly. I peeked out with my headlamp on. The light bounced off the wet trees, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no movement. I stayed half awake until dawn. The last day should have been easy, just 12 miles downhill. But the trail had changed. A rock slide must have happened recently because the entire section I was supposed to follow was buried. I tried to find a way around it, bushwhacking through thick undergrowth and trees, but I kept getting turned around. I used my compass, kept going east, but the terrain was rough. I slipped twice, scraped my hand, and nearly twisted my ankle. I climbed a ridge to get a better view. What I saw didn't make sense. The trail was supposed to continue in a straight line east, then bend south. But from the ridge, I could see the same patch of forest in every direction. No clearings, no markers, nothing. Just trees. It was like I was boxed in. I checked the compass again, still pointing east, but I couldn't see where east was supposed to take me anymore. I decided to go down the other side of the ridge. There had to be a way out. The ground was steep, slippery, and covered in loose dirt. I took slow steps, using branches and rocks to support myself. About halfway down, I stepped on a patch that gave out completely. I tumbled and hit the ground hard. My leg twisted badly, and I screamed. Couldn't get up. My left ankle was swollen and useless. I stayed there for hours trying to stay calm. I had a whistle in my pack, but no one was close enough to hear it. I tried my phone again. Still no signal. I took out my emergency beacon. It was the last resort. I pressed the button and waited. It could take hours or a day, depending on the weather and how far I really was from any known trail. The sun went down. I wrapped my leg with bandages, ate a protein bar, and leaned back against my backpack. I barely slept. I kept hearing things again. Not just animals, but branches snapping, soft crunches, and at one point, something that sounded like slow breathing, not far from where I was lying. I stayed still, gripping my small knife. I didn't care if it was a bear or a person. I was done with surprises. The next morning, a rescue team found me. 2 men in orange jackets and helmets. They said they got my beacon signal late at night and hiked in before sunrise. When I asked how far off the trail I was, they looked at each other. One of them told me that I had somehow gone 6 miles northeast of where I should have been. That didn't make sense to me. I had been going east the whole time. My compass wasn't broken. I was sure of it. They helped me out slowly, carried me in a stretcher after stabilizing my ankle. Took hours to reach their base camp. On the way, I told them about the jacket I saw, about the weird quiet at the lake, and about the strange noises. They didn't say much, just kept walking. At the ranger station, they asked more questions. One of the older rangers said something I can't forget. He told me I wasn't the first person to report getting turned around near that area. Said a couple of hikers last year reported similar things. Said it was easy to get disoriented out there, but the way he said it didn't sound like he really believed it was just bad navigation. I got home 2 days later. My leg took weeks to heal. I looked at the photos I took. Most were fine, but the one of the jacket came out blurry, almost like the lens had shifted at the last second. Everything else was sharp, but not that one photo. I haven't gone hiking alone since. I still go on trails sometimes, but only with friends. I triple-check maps. I use GPS backups. I stay far away from that part of the Rockies. Sometimes at night, when I wake up suddenly for no reason, I think about those woods, about that lake, about how it felt like the forest knew I was there and wanted me lost. But I made it out. I didn't break. I didn't vanish like the person who wore that jacket. I made it out. It was early September when I decided to do something different with my time off. I was 34 years old and working a desk job in the city, and my body felt stiff from months of sitting all day. I was tired of the same streets, the same buildings, the same routine. I needed something else, something real. So I picked a remote hiking trail in Montana. It wasn't too well known, but it had a few online reviews that said the area was quiet, peaceful, and good for people who wanted to avoid crowds. That was exactly what I needed. No traffic, no honking, no buzzing phones. Just me and nature. I planned a 5-day solo hike. I had everything packed. A lightweight tent, sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, a camp stove, enough water to last 2 days, a purifier, extra batteries, a GPS device, and a map. I also carried a knife and a bear spray canister clipped to my belt. I trained for a few weeks before the trip, jogging in the mornings and carrying my pack on walks. I thought I was ready. I thought I was prepared. I had no idea what was coming. The trailhead was a couple of hours outside a small town. I parked my car in the gravel lot and signed in at the ranger station. There was no one else around. The ranger station was empty. A small hand-painted sign said to sign the logbook if no one was present. I wrote my name, the date, and my planned return time. Then I slung my pack over my shoulder and headed off. The first day was beautiful. The weather was perfect. Mid-60s, clear skies, and a breeze that kept the bugs away. The trail was well marked and not too steep. I walked through thick woods, across small creeks, and past open meadows. Birds chirped overhead, and the occasional rustle in the brush made me pause, but it was always a squirrel or a rabbit. I set up camp near a small stream around 5 p.m. and cooked dinner. That night, I lay in my tent, listening to the sounds of nature. Crickets, distant owls, the soft gurgle of water. It was exactly what I wanted. The second day was a bit tougher. The trail climbed into higher elevation, and the terrain got rockier. I had to keep checking the map to make sure I was on track. There were some fallen trees and parts where the trail was faint, but I managed. I didn't see another soul the whole day. That evening, I set up camp near a ridge with a great view of the valley below. The wind picked up as the sun went down, and the temperature dropped fast. I crawled into my sleeping bag early. That night was when things started to feel off. I woke up around midnight. At first, I didn't know why. I lay still, listening. My heart was already beating fast, like it knew something I didn't. Outside, the wind had died down, and it was dead silent. No crickets, no owls, no water sounds, nothing, just silence. Then I heard it, a snapping sound, like a twig being stepped on. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. I held my breath. It happened again, closer this time. My hand went to my knife. I waited, heart pounding, ears straining. Then nothing. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed alert, listening to every sound. But nothing else happened. When morning came, I got up and checked around the camp. I didn't see any footprints. Maybe it was just an animal. A deer, maybe. But the silence had rattled me. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. I packed up and moved on. Day 3 was long. The trail took me through a dense forest where the sunlight barely reached the ground. Everything felt damp and heavy. The silence from the night before seemed to follow me. The woods were quieter than they had been. Less birdsong, less movement. I kept checking behind me, feeling like I was being watched. I stopped more often, listening. I even turned back once, sure I had heard footsteps behind me, but nothing was there. I set up camp late that day, deeper into the woods than I would have liked. I was tired, my legs ached, and my shoulders burned. I cooked dinner and ate quickly. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. That night, I made sure to hang my food in a bear bag and set up a perimeter with some fishing line and small bells I had packed, just in case. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of one of the bells jingling. I bolted upright. My heart was thumping so hard it hurt. I grabbed my knife and bear spray and waited. The tent was still zipped shut. I listened. Another jingle. Then silence. I unzipped the tent slowly and looked out. It was pitch black, but I could make out the outline of my bag still hanging from the tree. I shone my flashlight around. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I checked the area. One of the lines had been broken. Not cut, broken. snapped like something had tripped it hard. Still no tracks, no claw marks, no sign of animals. I felt sick. It wasn't normal. I decided to cut the trip short and head back. I was already halfway through my route, so I took a different path that looped back toward the trailhead. It would take 2 days. That day, I kept my knife in my hand the entire time. I moved faster, barely stopping to rest. I kept feeling like something was close. I didn't hear much, just the occasional crack of a branch or rustling in the distance. But I knew I wasn't alone. I didn't stop to set up a full camp that night. I found a flat spot off trail, laid out my bag, and kept my boots on. I didn't even cook. I just ate a protein bar and lay there, waiting for morning. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up to something breathing. It was slow and heavy, not close but close enough. My eyes opened wide. I stayed still, barely breathing. It went on for a full minute, then stopped. I waited, then I heard it again, moving away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as it was light enough, I packed and started moving. That last day felt like the longest day of my life. I was so close to getting out, but every sound made me jump. At one point, I found a tree with deep scratch marks running down the trunk. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. I kept moving. Finally, around late afternoon, I saw the sign for the trailhead. I almost cried. I rushed down the last stretch, pushing my body harder than I thought it could go. I got to the lot and saw my car, still there, no one else around. I opened the door, threw my pack inside, and locked all the doors. Then I sat there, hands shaking, heart racing. I stared at the woods, half expecting something to come out, but nothing did. When I got back to town, I told the ranger station what happened. The woman behind the desk nodded slowly, said she'd make a note of it, and that they'd send someone to check the area. I don't know if they ever did. I didn't stick around. I haven't gone hiking since. Not like that. I still go on walks, local trails, day trips, but never that deep, never that alone. Sometimes at night, I still think about that breathing, that slow, heavy breathing in the dark. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know, but I know I wasn't alone in those woods, and whatever was out there knew I was there too. I was 34 the first time I hiked alone in a remote part of Wyoming. I had done solo hikes before, but nothing this isolated. Most of my past hikes were in places where I'd pass a few other people during the day, maybe a ranger, maybe a pair of campers. This one was different. The area was way out near the Wind River Range, but off a lesser-known trail system, one that barely showed up on satellite maps and had no clear GPS signal for most of the route. I found it mentioned once or twice on an old forum online, people talking about the Switchback Trail that wasn't marked on recent maps anymore. The posts were old, from years ago. It was the challenge that drew me in. I wanted to do something harder than I had before. I wanted something that would make me feel like I earned every step. The plan was simple. I'd park near an old dirt road, hike up the switchbacks for the first 2 days, make camp near the upper ridgeline on the second night, and loop back down through a dense forest area and some old fire roads on the way out. 3 nights total. I packed for 5 just in case. The forecast looked good, clear skies, cool evenings, no storms in sight. I prepped my food, charged my headlamp, brought a power bank, backup compass, paper maps, bear spray, emergency whistle, and 2 fixed blade knives. I checked the load on my pack 4 times. Everything seemed solid. The drive out was long. I left pavement about 20 miles before reaching the trailhead. It wasn't even a real parking area, just a wide shoulder of packed dirt next to some overgrown brush. I checked my phone before heading out, 1 bar, then none. I clicked it off. That was the last time I'd have signal until I was back out, assuming everything went as planned. I locked the car, shouldered my pack, and stepped onto the path. The first few miles were uneventful. The ground was dry, a mix of pine needles and hard dirt. The air was crisp, and I felt excited. I was moving uphill right away, but it wasn't steep at first. I followed an old game trail that paralleled the switchback route, which I had marked on my map from satellite images. The ground was uneven, but not dangerous. just enough to keep me aware of my footing. The trees got taller as I climbed, and the canopy closed in. I could still see the sky, but the light dimmed slightly. Around 4 hours in, I found the first of the switchbacks. It wasn't maintained, but it was clearly once a proper trail, stone supports, some with steps, mostly decayed. I pushed up through it, sweating through my base layer even in the cool mountain air. The silence out there was heavier than I expected. No wind, no birds, just the crunch of my boots and the soft shifting of my pack with each step. I rested every 30 minutes or so, checked the compass and the map, and kept going. By evening, I had climbed about 8 miles in total and set up camp beside a stream that cut across a slope. I filtered water, cooked dehydrated pasta, ate in silence, then hung my bear bag from a branch 30 feet from camp. My tent was small, one-person ultralight, and it barely had room for me and my gear. That night, as I lay there, I couldn't sleep. Not really. The air was still, cold. I felt alert, too alert. My body was tired, but my mind was running too fast. I told myself it was just the excitement of being out alone. That's what I wanted. That's what I signed up for. But still, I only dozed off and on until about 2 a.m. when I heard a rustling sound. Not the soft rustling of wind or tree branches, but something heavier, deliberate. I sat up fast and clicked on my headlamp. The beam swept through the trees, flashing against the silver bark of aspens and the thick trunks of pines. I listened. I couldn't hear anything anymore. No footsteps, no animal sounds, nothing. Just my own breathing. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I broke camp early, ate a granola bar, and kept moving. I tried to shake off the weird feeling from the night. The second leg of the trail was even steeper. The switchbacks became tighter, the turns sharper, and the slope dropped off hard to my right. A misstep could send me tumbling down 50 feet or more. I took it slow, testing each foot placement. Some parts of the path had crumbled away, and I had to cling to exposed roots and rocks to pull myself across narrow stretches. Around noon, I came across a stretch of forest that felt different. The trees grew closer together, and there were no signs of animals. No scat, no prints, no broken branches. It was like nothing lived there. Everything was too still. I stopped walking and just listened. The silence was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint but sharp, like rotting meat. I thought maybe an animal had died nearby, maybe something large. I took a few steps forward and looked around. I never found a body, but the smell didn't go away. It just hung in the air like a warning. I pushed on. By late afternoon, I made it to a narrow clearing that offered a view of the valley below. The wind picked up a little, and I finally heard something besides my own footsteps. I set up camp near a ledge that overlooked a small basin. From that height, I could see miles of untouched forest. No cabins, no trails, no people, just endless green. That night, I sat on a flat rock and watched the sun go down. It should have felt peaceful. I should have felt proud. But something didn't sit right with me. I kept thinking about that smell, and the silence, and the feeling I had that someone or something was nearby even though I saw no one. I crawled into my tent, zipped up tight, and laid my knife close. Again, I barely slept. At around 3 a.m., I heard it again. Footsteps, this time closer. Not the sound of an animal sniffing around. These were slow, deliberate steps. I held my breath. I didn't turn on the light. I just listened. One step, then another, then silence. I don't know how long I lay there. Eventually, I drifted into a light sleep. When I woke up, it was already bright out. I stepped outside and looked around. Nothing was disturbed, nothing stolen, no tracks, just the forest, quiet and empty as ever. I packed up fast and started down the far side of the mountain. I was supposed to loop through a canyon, follow a fire road back toward the trailhead. But by then, I was ready to cut the trip short. I wanted out. As I dropped in elevation, the trees got denser. The trail wasn't clear anymore. I used the compass to keep moving in the right direction, but everything started looking the same. At one point, I realized I had doubled back slightly. I'd been walking for over an hour and ended up near a grove I'd already passed. I swore under my breath and corrected my course. That was when I found the first marker. It was a stick sharpened at one end and jammed into the dirt. Tied to the top with red twine was a feather. At first, I thought it was something left by a hunter or surveyor, but the stick was fresh. The bark had been stripped recently. The feather wasn't from any large bird I could think of, maybe hawk-sized, but it was clean, too clean, like it hadn't been out in the weather at all. I looked around. Nothing. No movement. I kept going. I found the second one 20 minutes later. Same style. Sharp stick, red twine, feather. This time the feather was black. Bigger. Felt deliberate, like it was meant to be seen. I tried to tell myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe just local markers for hunting zones or trap areas. But it didn't sit right. I picked up the pace. I stopped taking breaks. I moved through the trees as fast as I could, watching every step but scanning ahead constantly. At some point in the afternoon, I realized I hadn't eaten. I forced down a protein bar while walking. My stomach was tight. My mouth was dry. I filtered water from a stream but barely drank. Then I found the third marker. This one wasn't on the ground. It was hanging from a tree limb 6 feet up. A stick bundle. 3 of them tied together with twine into a triangle. More feathers. And something else. Cloth. Piece of ripped fabric. It looked like shirt material. Faded blue. Frayed at the edge. I stared at it for a long time. That was the moment I stopped thinking I was alone. I started hearing noises again. Not footsteps this time, but other sounds. Snapping branches. The shift of rocks. I couldn't tell if it was animals or something else. Came from all directions. I'd stop. Listen. Nothing. I'd walk. More sounds. My mind was racing, running through every possibility. Bears. Mountain lions. People messing with me. I didn't know which was worse. I moved downhill fast, half jogging, using my trekking poles to stay upright. I followed what I thought was the trail, but it kept fading in and out. My boots slipped on loose gravel. I nearly fell twice. The shadows were getting longer, and I didn't want to spend another night out there. Just before sunset, I saw something that stopped me cold. A boot. It was lying near a moss-covered rock, half hidden by leaves. Old, weathered, torn at the toe. I stepped closer. Inside the boot was a bone. Not a large one, but clearly human. I took time off from work in late October. I had been putting in 12-hour days, sometimes even more, and my head felt like it was on the verge of snapping. I needed a break away from people, noise, and the routines of the city. I picked a trail I had been meaning to do for a while. It wasn't one of the popular ones. It ran deep into the forest up north near the edge of a national park. From what I had read, it was about 40 miles round trip and would take me 2 or 3 nights. I had done similar hikes before and felt confident. I packed light but smart food for 4 days, water purification tablets, tent, sleeping bag, bear spray, first aid kit, knife, and an extra phone battery. The drive there was long and boring. Miles of empty road and pine trees. I parked my car at the small gravel lot at the trailhead. There was only one other car there, an older Jeep with tinted windows. I didn't see anyone around. I checked the sign-in log at the wooden kiosk. The last person to sign in had been 2 days before. Their writing was a bit messy, and I could only make out their first name, Ryan. The air was cold and crisp. The trail was damp from recent rain. My boots sank into soft mud in places. The first couple of hours were uneventful. The forest swallowed me up quickly. The sound of wind pushing through the high trees was the only thing I heard for long stretches. I found it calming. I didn't listen to music. I just walked and breathed. By mid-afternoon, I reached the river crossing marked on the map. There was a fallen log people used as a bridge. It looked slippery, so I sat down and scooted across slowly. I took a break on the other side, had a protein bar, and drank some filtered water from the river. I hadn't seen anyone since the trailhead. As I hiked deeper into the woods, the trail got narrower and the trees thicker. Sunlight only made it through in thin shafts. I kept going for another couple of hours before finding a flat area near a cluster of large boulders. I pitched my tent there. It was far enough from the trail to give me privacy, but not so far I'd get lost. That night, I cooked a dehydrated meal on my little stove. I sat outside my tent in a fleece jacket, watching the trees sway. The temperature dropped quickly. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag, I was exhausted. I fell asleep within minutes. I woke up at around 2 a.m. I had to pee. The forest was dead silent. I stepped outside with my headlamp on, walked a few feet into the trees, and did my business. As I turned back to the tent, I heard a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't an animal. It was like someone stepping on wet leaves, maybe 20 or 30 feet away. I froze. My heart started racing. I turned my headlamp in the direction of the sound. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I waited for a while, barely breathing. Nothing moved. Eventually, I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe even a branch falling. I crawled back into my tent, zipped it up tight, and listened for a while before falling back asleep. The next morning was quiet. I packed up and kept hiking. I was about halfway through the loop. I passed a small lake around noon and stopped there to eat. The surface was perfectly still, like glass. I took some pictures with my phone. It was beautiful, but something felt off. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the silence. No birds, no bugs, just stillness. I kept going. A couple miles past the lake, I noticed something strange. Off to the side of the trail, maybe 50 feet into the trees, there was an old campsite. A fire pit, some logs for sitting, and what looked like an old tarp tied between two trees. It looked abandoned. I walked over to check it out. The tarp was torn in places, and the fire pit was full of wet ashes. But what caught my attention was a backpack leaning against one of the logs. It was dirty but not weather damaged. I unzipped it and looked inside. There was food, jerky, trail mix, energy bars. Some of it had mold on it. A water filter, a flashlight with dead batteries, and a spiral notebook. I flipped through the pages. Most of it was scribbled writing, hard to read. But one line stood out. It had been written multiple times in shaky handwriting. "Someone's following me." I stared at the words for a while. My stomach tightened. I looked around. I suddenly felt exposed, like someone was watching me. I backed away from the camp and got back on the trail, walking faster now. My heartbeat didn't slow down for a long time. That night, I camped on a ridge. It was more open. I could see in all directions. I set up my tent close to a big rock and made a small fire, more for comfort than anything. I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, thinking I heard things. Branches breaking, footsteps. Once I thought I saw a flashlight in the distance, but it was gone when I sat up and looked again. The third day, I planned to finish the loop. I had about 12 miles to go. I got up early and started hiking before the sun was fully up. My legs were sore and I felt tired, but I wanted to be done. About 3 miles in, I found footprints on the trail. They weren't mine. The tread was different. They looked fresh. I followed them for a while. They stayed on the trail. Same pace as me. Same direction. That meant whoever made them was ahead of me. I didn't like that. I started to feel nervous again. I kept going, constantly checking the trees and listening. Around noon, I reached a steep downhill section. I slipped once and scraped my hand, but kept moving. I didn't stop for lunch. I just wanted out. At one point, I rounded a bend and saw something that made my blood run cold. A person was standing in the middle of the trail, about 50 yards ahead. They were facing away from me, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. Just standing there, not moving, not hiking, just still. I froze. My first instinct was to call out, but something stopped me. Something about the way they stood, it didn't feel right. I slowly stepped backwards, trying not to make noise. I left the trail and moved into the trees, circling around the figure from a distance. When I got back to the trail, maybe half a mile later, they were gone. I didn't see them again, but I started running. I ran for miles. I only stopped when I saw the wooden kiosk near the trailhead. When I got to my car, the Jeep was gone. I opened the door, locked it behind me, and just sat there shaking. I eventually started the engine and drove away without looking back. I never reported anything. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know who the person was or what they were doing. I didn't want to answer questions or be told I imagined it. But I haven't been hiking alone since. I still think about that backpack, those scribbled words, and that still figure standing in the trees. I still wonder if Ryan ever made it out. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if someone followed me out too.